Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Q&A with Lloyd Auerbach, Professor Paranormal. Good to see everybody here. The folks who are already popping in. I see some regulars here, and I think I have a few extra folks might maybe not have seen before. So welcome, everybody. We're back on our every other week schedule through the rest of the year. So you can mark your calendar starting today, September 14th, that we will be on every 2 weeks through December at this point, and then we'll start off the year. I'll be promoting the starting date when we get closer to December, of course. And hello from Mexico City, Mary Prankster. Good to see somebody down there. Anyway, tonight, let me start off by mentioning a couple of things, as I always do. I would be remiss if I did not promote or talk about the courses that the Rhine Education Center has coming up. There is an introduction to parapsychology course, which is a really good overview of the field of parapsychology, both the laboratory work and in the field work and people's experiences. Jimmy Aiken is teaching that. I created the course years ago. Jimmy has kind of modified it a little bit as he's taken it over as I'm teaching other courses at this point. So that's starting up October 7th. Most of our classes are starting either the 1st of October and after, or that following week. So then there's also a course taught by John Kruth, who's our executive director and research director of the Rhine Research Center, called Quantitative Research Methods for Parapsychology. For those of you that are really into experimental work, that really introduces you to the experimental methodologies and the best way to get the data out when studying people with psychic abilities. I am teaching 3 courses. I am teaching an advanced field investigations course, which starts October 1st, and that runs 8 weeks. Most of our courses do run 8 weeks with one exception. The one thing about the advanced field investigations course is that there are prerequisites. So either you have taken my initial field investigations course, or you contact me and let me know that you haven't taken that other course, but we should talk to see if you're ready to take the advanced course. That's pretty much it. I have passed people along without taking that initial course. The second course I'm teaching, which is on Mondays starting October 6th, is a course called Paranormal Case Studies. And that might be most interesting to folks because it's an 8-week course looking at specific investigative cases of apparitions, hauntings, poltergeists, and even a case or two that had normal explanations in there. There's many of them, of the cases that are covered are my own court cases because I can go into them very deeply. One of which is the USS Hornet Aircraft Carrier Museum, and I present some video interviews with some of the initial witnesses that is not out there in the public domain. But there are also some other key cases, such as the Seaford poltergeist case of 1958, which is the case that gave us the current model of poltergeist activity that we have today. So there's some cases that are important in the field, but also some of my own cases that are in that particular course. And the third course, which is a short course, starting October 2nd, it's a 4-week class, although there's going to be 1 week where we're going to skip, called People of Parapsychology. And it really is going to look at some of the more important names of people who have either made major breakthroughs in the field, revolutionized our methodologies, revolutionized the investigative process. There are a couple of key major investigators that I'm covering in there in the past. It focuses on the people, their lives, their contributions, pretty much who they were and why they were in parapsychology and what they really ended up believing or looking at, coming to the conclusions that were there. Most of them are from there's some early ones because the first week I'm talking about some of the early ghost hunters, investigators from the SPR and the ASPR, but then I'm going to cover some of the folks in the more recent times, not so much in the early 21st century. So those are the 5 classes that are being offered by the Rhine Research Center, Rhine Education Center. And anyway, I'll mention this again. For those of you that are not in the know, here is the link to the course page. It's just rhineedu.org. And hi, Safina. Haley, hello. Take a look at those courses. And I'll also mention that speaking of courses, taking one of the Rhine courses is one of the prizes. So in other words, taking it for free is one of the prizes in a raffle that has just started up. We are doing a fundraising raffle for the Rhine Research Center. The top prize is a reading with psychic medium Laura Lynn Jackson, who you may have heard of. She is a very well-known medium. She's been in a number of TV shows, but more importantly, she's had best-selling books. She has the new book coming out on November 11th, so 11/11. That'll be coming out then. We'll be doing a little bit more of a push for the raffle at that point, but we just launched the raffle yesterday, from what I understand. And she's the top prize. It is next to impossible to get a reading with her at this point because she is overbooked for the next probably 2 years, except for certain area times that she keeps open for things that she can give back to the community or to organizations like the Rhine Research Center. So she is also one of our board members. I'm president of the board of directors of the Rhine Research Center, and Laura Lynn is actually one of our board members. So the grand prize is a 1-hour reading with her. There are also prizes like signed copies of her 3 books. The new one has not come out yet. It's going to be called Guided, The Secret Path to an Illuminated Life. There are going to be 2 tickets to Sci Games International 2026. That's a big event that just happened in Charlottesville, Virginia in August. It was so successful, it's going to be expanded. It'll be in Charlotte, North Carolina at the end of July next year. I'm hoping to be there myself. There's a course that will be offered to you as one of the prizes. We have some t-shirts and other assorted prizes that we're going to be there. So I'm going to place the link to the raffle in the chat here. You can also find that on the Rhine Research Center's website. And I'll be posting that on Facebook and through all my social media from time to time. So hopefully you folks will, remember this is also to support research and education in parapsychology. It is in support of the Rhine Research Center and to keep us going. The Rhine Center, for those of you that may be new to this channel, is the legacy of the original Duke Parapsychology. So the Duke University Parapsychology Lab, which ran from 1935 to 1965, then moved off campus and became a foundation and institute, and eventually was renamed as the Rhine Research Center in the early 90s. So this year is the 90th year of continuous parapsychology work started by J.B. and Louisa Rhine in 1935. So please do support. You can buy 1 ticket or 5 tickets or however many you want. We had a very successful raffle last time with Laura Lynn, and hopefully we'll be successful again helping the research center continue. The alternative, if you don't want to do the raffle, is you can donate directly to the Rhine, and that is a tax-deductible donation. And that's just simply Rhine.org. So that is a 501c3 organization. So I'm really proud not only to be teaching for the Rhine, but also be so involved in there. If anybody is in the North Carolina area, although we don't know the exact location for a number of reasons yet, I will be in Durham, North Carolina for a workshop I'm going to do on the 15th of November. And we will also be webcasting that. That's a Saturday. So that's on the off week in November. I'm not going to be doing this show on that weekend. But I will be doing a workshop on working with psychics and mediums in a number of different contexts, and also kind of how to assess a reading in some respects. At least that's the tentative plan for my topic. That'll be a several-hour workshop. It'll be available on the web for free or donation. We, of course, want a donation if that's possible. And then there'll be spaces locally in person with me as well. So keep an ear out to upcoming shows and some posts that I'll be putting as we get closer to that. I'll finalize everything probably in mid-October for that. All right, so that's enough for me just getting started. So let's see. This show, this Q&A, is about you folks asking me questions or raising topics. So it doesn't have to be a question per se. If there's something you'd like me to talk about, to address, I am happy to do that. And I'll just give it a moment, just kind of keeping an eye on the chat here as well. One thing I might mention, because it often comes up, the question of people come up. I do want to just point out that for those of you following the news, the entertainment news, you might have seen and probably will be seeing a lot more of articles about Ed and Lorraine Warren and the new Conjuring movie, and how it really doesn't reflect anything in reality. In fact, I think the Conjuring movies are about as far, they're much further removed from reality than even the reality TV shows. All right, Paul, do I have any new interviews coming up? Yeah, I do. a lot of the interviews I do are actually pre-recorded. So I've got one I'm doing this coming Thursday for a show, and I'm just trying to remember what the show is. Um, I can't. I've got one I'm recording on Thursday. It's actually not going to air on Thursday, so I'm not quite sure when that's going to actually air. But I've got a couple of shows that are scheduled at this point to be pre-recorded. Um, it's going to be called. I think the show. Oh, here's the show. The show is called Ghost City. So I don't know when that show will air, but actually be put up on the web. Once it is, I will be adding that to my media page. So if you go to my website, which is simply lloydauerbach.com, and you click on media, you'll see a link. Anytime I get a new show, I'll be putting that at the top of the list there. So that's interesting. That there it is. So actually, once that I get a link from that show, I'll be putting that up. I think I put a couple of new ones up recently up on there. I'm also going to be combing the internet from time to time for some of my older interviews, since there are a lot of old interviews. When you just run my name through Google, I'm pretty much the only Lloyd Auerbach, so it's not hard to find a lot of old stuff I've done. And there's stuff around from the early 2000s that's there. Podcasts and other things that are available. So I've built my list up quite a bit, but I still haven't added everything to it. All right, Paul, Superman 2 was my favorite Superman movie. Yeah, well, I was a big fan of the two movies, the first two movies with Christopher Reeve. And Superman 2 is a really good movie because, of course, he's fighting the Kryptonians. But at this moment now, and the Donner cut's really good, yeah. I got a copy of that on DVD, in fact. I will say that the new Superman movie is my favorite of all the Superman movies at this point, for a lot of reasons. And as much as Christopher Reeve embodied Superman, he embodied Superman of the 70s. And really, I think the new movie embodies where we are with DC Comics today, where we are with Superman and the other comics today. We're almost where we are. Because in the comics, of course, Superman and Lois are married, and he has a kid. So there's a lot more. It's further along the timeline, you might say. It'll be interesting to see how they develop some of that stuff. All right, and if folks are wondering why Superman came up, if you're new to this channel, it's mainly because pop culture pops up, and I'm a big fan of comic books and science fiction and things like that. Yeah, Dean Cain, I mean, the show was really more about Lois, I think. Lois and Clark, literally. So that's different. Smallville was a much better portrayal of a lot of the stuff. And there were a lot of comic book writers that were involved there, too. And one of the reasons that I've stuck with comics, besides the fact that I just simply love the medium, is that I partly got interested in psychic phenomena because of comic books when I was a kid. And I started reading. My mom was a preschool teacher, taught me to read when I was about 4 years old. The things I was reading early on were Greek and Norse mythology books, for kids, and comic books, especially Superman. This is pre-Fantastic Four, so I never got into Marvel at the same time. But the very first time I saw the word parapsychology, to my recollection, and this is going back to actually my recollection, even when I first got into the field, was in a Superman comic. And the first time I heard the word was on an episode of Dark Shadows. Psychic stuff has been part and parcel of comic books and science fiction since the very beginning. And in fact, Kathy, I'm going to get to your thing in a minute. I was having a conversation with a friend recently who was telling me that some of the folks out there are starting to use this new term, psionics. And I had to let him know that the word psionics, and you'll be seeing that if you haven't seen it a lot with the remote viewers and some of the other folks, it is an old science fiction term going back many, many decades, referring to the study and application of psi. In fact, when I first got into the field, I had business. In fact, I've got business cards right here, still from that time era. I was doing a little consulting outside of the American Society for Psychical Research, and my consulting business was psionics consultants. And Jeffrey Mishlove tried back in the 80s tried to really promote that term. And the TV Guide has used that term over the years. It's a common sci-fi term, not new. So it's interesting that people are thinking it's new, and it's being, I guess people in that world are not as familiar with pop culture. All right, Kathy, you watched a ton of old shows of the Warrens recently, and they were a guest on the Tony Show. They talked about the Annabelle doll. Any thoughts? Ed was very adamant she caused deaths. Would have taken everything Ed Warren said with not a grain of salt, but a block of salt. Very clear that they exaggerated. I don't want to say they made stuff up, but they made stuff up. They at one point after The Exorcist came out, they might have been better investigators before the movie The Exorcist came out, but after the Exorcist movie came out, and especially through the late 70s, and after Amityville, especially after Amityville, everything was demonic. When I was working at the American Society for Psychical Research, I talked to a psychotherapist in Connecticut, who was calling for more reference information. She was dealing with some former clients of the Warrens who were traumatized because the Warrens came in and told them that they had a demon in their home. And what the therapist told me, the psychologist told me, was that she went to the house. She was curious enough to go to the house and found a normal explanation for what was going on. So the Warrens had basically had traumatized them. And I talked to other folks where that had happened. And this is a problem with ghost hunters even today, that some ghost hunters are going into places if they get a growl or some unusual sound on an EVP or get a weird feeling in a place, they suddenly go to the demon thing, even without questioning that, and often leave people stressed out or even sometimes traumatized. That's not all ghost hunters. It's only a segment of them. So it's a real problem there. And the Annabelle doll, I can't imagine a doll causing any deaths at all. A curse is something you believe. It has nothing to do with the object. Now, objects can hold emotional information, so they can feel bad, just like a house can feel bad. That's from the people who were around and actions around that place. But that's not, that's not a curse or something physically causing you to do something, to die. Now, the other question is whether or not the doll had some sort of, toxic material. That might have been a different story. Mary Prankster went to see Conjuring 4. Think of the Warrens. So basically, you've heard a little bit of the Warrens, what I thought. So I'm going to tell you a little story right now. Back in it was in 2008, I was at one of the paranormal state conferences. It was called UNIVCon in Pennsylvania at Penn State. And Lorraine Warren was there. Interestingly enough, Lorraine Warren was represented also by the same lecture agent I had. It was after Ed died. I met Ed back in the 90s with Jerry Solfin, one of my colleagues, or maybe in the late 80s. He was on a local talk show. Very nice guy, but and Jerry knew him pretty well, but so much exaggeration and frankly BS. Lorraine, was fairly far along in age, and I decided to go hear her talk. And I'm not going to comment on the content of the talk specifically, except when she got a question about the Amityville case during a Q&A. And she went on to say that she and Ed were sent to the Amityville house to investigate by the president of the Parapsychological Association. That was either her being senile or a blatant lie, because that never happened. No parapsychologist sent the Warrens to the location. I heard another well-known personality back in very early 80s at a lecture say that he had been requested by the American Society for Psychical Research to investigate Amityville, which was also a lie, because at the time this particular individual was suing the ASPR for not listing his course in their course directory. So when that happened, when she started talking about the Amityville case, starting off with that point and so much more that was just simply blatantly not true, I got up and left. And I got up and left partly because I did not want to stay. And get angrier or more upset because I didn't want to challenge this old lady in front of her fans. I felt it was more appropriate for me not to even be there any further. And what I heard later on that day was people were, there was a buzz about why Lloyd Auerbach got up and left the talk. So, you know, I know of other cases where the Warrens basically, again, they made these conclusions. They also claimed that they never charged anything except maybe for expenses. But I know of two situations where the expenses were excessive. In one case, a woman called us at JFK University. She was deciding whether to bring the Warrens out to Michigan for something going on in her home, which we ended up working on the phone with her about. And she told me the Warrens wanted $5,000. And it's like, $5,000 for what? And she said, well, they said it's expenses. And I said, when was them planning to come out? And she said, in a couple of weeks. I said, well, I mean, airfare alone might have been, you know, if they were coming out within a couple of days, it might have been over $1,000 for each of them. But there's no way it would cost them $5,000 to be there. None at all. And I said, you know, call them back and just say, what's the $5,000 for? And at that point, she called me back and said they wouldn't give any information about that. Just said expenses. And she said, well, thanks very much. I can't afford it. The other was a case down in Orange County, California, where the Warrens presented the family. And there was actually a reporter who was a writer who was going to be writing up the case. He was kind of living with them for a little while. He actually caught one of the family members faking stuff. And he called to let me know that they wanted $5,000 they did come out. They wanted $5,000 for the expenses, and the family was going to pay it, but they were curious as to why that was so much. And I said, I advised him to advise them to ask for an invoice with the expenses spelled out, since they don't charge for their time. And as soon as and they can say it's for their accountant. They were actually self-employed, so that certainly was a reasonable request. As soon as they asked for that, the Warrens left in a huff and never bothered asking for the money again. Those are just some of the things that I know from, you know, individuals who were involved in this. I also knew of a case in Connecticut where they said it was demonic. It was some music that was playing at really random times. They couldn't figure out where the music was coming from because it would play for a few seconds. Turned out to be, after I worked with the family look around, it turned out to be a small AM radio that had fallen behind a radiator and was shorted out, and it was occasionally connecting and playing once in a while. In other words, had normal explanation. It was certainly not demonic. There wasn't even any demonic music playing, like satanic music. So, some anime are better than horror movies in depicting psi and the paranormal. That's absolutely right. Just like comic books are better than a lot of science fiction TV shows and movies, because they can actually go into things. There's some good movies out there. There have been plenty of good movies that have, whether they're horror, most of them are really science fiction, that display or show psychic abilities, exaggerated, of course, but they often kind of really touch on the real stuff in good ways. But I do know that cartoons, that anime often include psychic phenomena, ghosts, things like that, and demons, of course, as part of the fodder that's part of it. Let's see, Angela, yeah. Rhine courses are recorded. Okay, that's responding to somebody else asking a question. Yes, the courses, sorry about that, Holly, I missed that. The courses are all not only are they recorded if somebody can't make the live time, but once the course is over, you have access for at least 6 months to the course materials and the recordings. So you have access for quite some time. Yeah. And thank you, Angie. Angie works with the Rhine Center. All right. And Mysteries of Hawaii. Lopaka, good to see you here. For those of you, if you make it out to Waikiki, you need to go on one of Mysteries of Hawaii's tours for sure. Great stuff. Hi, Rose. Good to see you here. All right. Kathy Nadal, I'm listening to The Hostage of the Devil by Malachi Martin on Audible. Yeah. I'm familiar with the book. I read it back in the 90s. I mean, it comes at, the fact is that it's coming from a very Catholic perspective, and a very particular Catholic perspective, because I've talked to priests who just don't believe generally in the demonic possession thing. Um, there are very few actual legitimate exorcisms that have been performed. Probably more now, only because there has been a group in the Vatican that has been involved in that. But it's not something. I've talked to folks, one of whom has worked with that group, who's told me that really he's only even seen, of all the people that have been investigated, he's seen one or two that he suspected might have been demonic in that sense. And even then he wasn't sure. But that book, Hostage to the Devil, is a classic book by Malachi Martin. I mean, that's one of the classics that's out there in that subject matter. There are others as well. So just something to take a look at. Think of all the people who are diagnosed with mental illness when it's really a radio or some other normal explanation. That's one thing. And in fact, one of the cases I go over, and I've talked about it in some of my other classes, but one of the cases I go over, it was actually a local case here in not far from where I live right now, in Contra Costa County outside of San Francisco in the East Bay. It was a family that was having all sorts of weird stuff happen in their house. They were leasing a house, and they called around. It was physical stuff. I mean, all four of them were experiencing it. And it wasn't objects moving around, but it was things including fireballs appearing in midair, little bursts of fire and light, and noxious odors moving around, and places in the house that felt really bad, getting headaches. There were a whole bunch of different elements that came together there. And they first called the major universities in the Bay Area every time, because they didn't know, none of them had parapsychology. And every time they called these universities, they were shunted to the psych department. And every time, it didn't matter that they said all four of them were having the experiences. Every time they were told to come in for psych testing. Every time. Not a single one of the people who talked to them on the phone thought that it might be environmental. Forget about paranormal. It could have been environmental. It could have been drugs. It could have been other things as well. And they even called, somehow they got together, connected to the Bay Area skeptics. The guy basically told them, you need to go to see a psychologist. Again, four of them all having the experiences. And what the guy, the principal told me was that they sometimes got, two of them would get on the phone with like somebody at Stanford University, somebody else. But for whatever reason, they went to the major universities. They didn't know about JFK for some reason, even though it was like 15 miles away. It wasn't that kind of university, where we actually had parapsychology. I was still teaching parapsychology. And none of it was paranormal. All of it was unusual. None of it was paranormal. But it was easy to see why they might have thought it was. But it's sad to see, and just really sad, that the first thing so many people in psychology jump to is you have some issues, some mental issues. I've talked to people who've had perceptual issues. In other words, it was not mental, certainly not mental illness. They came to the wrong conclusion based on the information they had. Or it was a sort of an optical illusion or auditory illusion or something like that. We go back in time, people were diagnosed with all sorts of mental illnesses for just simply believing they were psychic. Forget about whether they were or not. And then there are issues of people with who are hearing voices. And whether that's schizophrenia or being too psychically sensitive needs to be considered. Because the latter, the too psychically sensitive, has been found in many cases. Not all schizophrenia, and some schizophrenics actually get psychic openings, which creates a double problem there for that as well. So, yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Caitlin. Hello, Bad to the Bone Paranormal. Okay. All right. And thank you for saying hi. It is true that there are many places, that other places have Various archdioceses may have someone designated as an exorcist, but the process the Catholic Church goes through, thankfully, is significant psychological and medical examination. So that's a really important factor that one needs to consider for that. All right, let's see here. Okay, Lloyd can discuss demonologists work paranormal events. Okay. First of all, demonology is not science at all. Demonology is religion or based in mythology, but it's based in religion. And most of the people who call themselves demonologists are not trained in any sort of religious studies related to demons or the religious belief in demons or jinn or anything else that's like that. So what I often see is people, ghost hunting groups that claim to be doing a scientific investigation also have a team demonologist, which immediately biases the actual investigation away from science. The reason it's not science, whereas ghosts are, or could be, is number one, we are dealing with, as Kathy Nadal is a great evidential medium, you are dealing with spirits who can pretty much verify their identity with information and evidence. Demons cannot do that. If a demon is possessing, or this is like channeling, somebody is channeling an alien being, or the Greek goddess Athena, we can't prove ID. We don't get any information that, there's no way to say that that's who that is. That could just as easily be a dead vacuum cleaner salesman from the 1930s who was doing door-to-door sales, and now he can come through someone, but for whatever reason, he didn't think anybody would listen to him if he said he was a vacuum cleaner salesman, so he must be some ancient warrior king. That's an easier way to put that front. It's more impressive. You know, having a demonologist makes no sense. It means that the fact that the person without religious background and studies being careful of what they call a demon, it is just as likely that they are going to say there's something demonic happening. If the people have any fear or any negative reaction originally, or even if they don't. So personally, when I've dealt with teams where they have a team demonologist, I'll start like interrogating that person who's a team demonologist. Just like sometimes I find that there was one group I dealt with that had a team skeptic, or actually she called herself the team debunker, and the team sensitive. So she was both the debunker and the psychic, which was bizarre. And you should never use the term debunking unless you're truly a debunker, meaning you think it's all fake. You know, I agree, bad to the bone. I don't see the point of a demonologist on a team. I don't know about a psychiatrist unless I vetted the psychiatrist or psychologist, by the way, to make sure that they were open to psychic things. Not that they were necessarily going to immediately label things psychic, but they had to be open to them. There are an enormous number of psychologists and psychiatrists, especially psychiatrists, who have no interest in and don't believe that psychic, paranormal things really could exist. And you have to be careful with those folks. It's okay if the person's a true skeptic. In other words, if they don't know or haven't made up their mind, that's okay. And they can still look for, you can have somebody who really does believe in psi and in the paranormal, who can still and should still look for psychological issues in the situation. But the thing that you have to remember, and this is where a psychiatrist might be better than a psychologist, is that environmental factors can affect people physiologically. Psychiatrists is trained as medical doctors. They might be better able to determine that, but so can an environmental scientist kind of come up with that. So let's see. Tibetan monks, lamas do a lot of meditations. Are they more psi sensitive? Well, they might be. There have been studies with meditators, and it does show that meditation does allow someone to be more psychically open. And since you mentioned that, I just happened to get a copy of this, a little coincidentally, at a used bookstore. This is the classic work about, this is Magic and Mystery in Tibet. This is kind of the classic work by Alexandra David Neal. You can find that on the Internet Archive for free. It is available for free to download. I just happened to get a copy of the Dover publication as well. Really interesting stuff. Cross-culturally, there's many practices across cultures, including rituals and things like that, that put people in an altered state, allowing them to be more psych-inducive, more psychic in that way, psychically sensitive. So that is a real thing, for sure. Um, all sorts of things. Graveyard Grog, the Warrens always thought everything was demonic. Yeah. You know, you can't bring the reason you can't bring religion into science or demons into the process is because, by definition, by the Judeo-Christian, actually the Christian definition, Catholic Christian definition, a demon is a fallen angel and of the devil, so-called devil. And because they were fallen angels, angels were created directly by God, and God is unknowable by definition. You have to have faith that God exists. It's not, you have to have belief. It has nothing to do with, there's no way to prove the existence of a deity like that. Just like you can't disprove God exists either. Just like you can't disprove that Thor, the real Germanic or Nordic god Thor, exists. Maybe the Marvel god you can prove doesn't exist, but not the real one from mythology. You can't prove a negative in that way. So because demons are outside of the natural order of things, they're magic, true magic. And science can't deal with that. I mean, it's a separate thing altogether. It is religion, and not all religions believe in demons or have the same belief. When somebody says I'm contacting an angel, it's like, what does that mean? Are you contacting a biblical angel or a higher being that has more good intentions for people? Because I got news for you. In the Old Testament, angels did not always have good intentions for humans, but they were still not demons. So you got to be careful about that stuff. Let's see here. Let me just see where else. Let me go back a little bit. Bad of the Bone, bringing skeptics, especially ones who challenge what's seen or heard. That's a good thing. So a true skeptic is a good thing. Those people who are disbelievers, who are always going to sometimes make up an explanation that makes no sense, like 5 people see an apparition, a ghost, suddenly that's mass hallucination. Show me the evidence for mass hallucination, and I might accept it. There really isn't any study. There are no major studies of mass hallucination. So that's a problem. But true skeptics, people who challenge, who ask questions, we should all go on investigations and ask questions. We should all be skeptical until we see the evidence or kind of work through alternative explanations. That's really important. That's what we teach in parapsychology for things as well. Let's see here. Graveyard Grog, think of God as a computer programmer. Hopefully you're not talking about the simulation hypothesis or theory of reality. But yeah, I mean, people can look at it that way. Personally, if you may not have ever seen this movie because it's an older movie, I think from the 70s. I believe it's from the late 70s. A movie called Oh God. Not Oh God 2, Oh God. Based on a book called Oh God, which I highly recommend. I can't remember who the author was, but Oh God stars George Burns as God. And it's a great movie. It's, it has a great message about God in it as well. It's not a religious movie whatsoever. It is a bit of a comedy, and the book is even funnier, but it's worth taking a look at if you can find it in streaming. Bad to the Bone, go into your investigations with your faith. If I were to believe in stones, mediums, and stuff like that, that's fine. You can go in with your faith. There is good evidence for people being psychic, for good mediums, but there's a lot of people who are not good at it, or think that they are, but are not. And then of course there's the phonies too, but rarely do we find them even trying to do investigations except on TV. That's the problem. If you had the opportunity to direct a movie, what would it be like? Sci-fi, paranormal? Oh, it would be, honestly, oh boy, or a documentary. Wow, that's a really good question. But I will say, especially as a co-author of 2 paranormal mystery novels today, You can find them with my name on them. I'm the third author on Afterlife and Near Death. We have a third one we're working on. I would probably first go for the paranormal sci-fi movie. In fact, I have a storyline. At some point, I want to write it into a novel um, that I think would be pretty interesting. Um, Partly because I'd want to include real stuff in it, although exaggerated. That's the thing about science fiction. You can speculate, you can go further, and I think that's for entertainment. That's often important, but there's certainly enough stories. Honestly, there's enough good stories to make a good, even edgy, slightly edgy science fiction film based on real events. Because the fact is that we are dealing with science fiction in many respects when we portray these things. They don't have to be scary. In fact, the majority of ghost movies are either dramas or comedies. And I think that's an important thing since most ghosts are human. It just shows that as well. Um, like what Peter Guthrie said in Dark Shadows, we have to be skeptical, otherwise we'll believe everything we're told. Yes, and we see too many people believing too much of what they're told today, thanks to social media. Yeah. So the first one was called Oh God. The second one was Oh God, You Devil. But Oh God, I think, is the better movie, of course. And George Burns was the perfect cast based on the book that I've seen as well. Oh, I guess that was Oh God 2, and then Oh God, You Devil was the third one. Yeah, I forgot about that. Are all your books on Prime? All of my in-print books, currently in-print books, are available through Amazon. They're not necessarily logged into the Kindle Unlimited program. Not all of them have, the ones that are coming from publishers do not necessarily have an ebook. Most of them do, but there's a couple of my older books that do not, the publisher did not make ebooks out of those. But more recently, I'm self-publishing, so those are both paperback and ebooks. And in fact, my reincarnation channeling and possession is only an ebook on Kindle and Nook, but it's also an audiobook. My book, A Paranormal Casebook, second edition, is a Kindle book and a paperback, but also an audiobook as well. So, and I'll be eventually working on a couple of other books. I have a couple in mind to do, one of which is a second volume of cases as well. But you can find my other books there certainly pretty easily. Just put my name in. Again, you should be able to get to them as well. And there are audiobooks of the two novels as well, and those are also available as ebooks. So they are there. All right, Rose. Speaking of Catholic again, thousands of people saw the sun zigzag and dance at Fatima. I don't believe mass hallucination either. I haven't really looked into that one, so I couldn't tell you. But when we talk about mass hallucination, when you say a hallucination is coming from inside, and sometimes suggestion can account for certain things, but a lot of times it has to do with perception. An optical illusion is not a hallucination. If you see something in an optical illusion, it's not a hallucination. If you look at Rorschach, ink blots, they trigger something that's a perception of what the ink blot is, but that's not a hallucination. So it may be that what was going on physically at Fatima, plus psychically, if there's a psychic bit of information, then you have a slight issue about that term. If somebody perceives a ghost, if somebody, let's say we're in a room and we're at one of my favorite places like the USS Hornet, and two of the people see one of the sailors appearing, just walking down, then suddenly disappearing, but there's three other people who don't see anything. Those two people might have been more psychically sensitive to that apparition. What they perceived, technically because they got a signal from outside, would not be classed as a true hallucination, but it's sort of a perceptual hallucination in that way, because they got a signal that's not, their eyes didn't pick up in that way. It gets a little complicated with terms there. Were any of your earlier books made into audiobooks? I'm afraid not. I will probably, I haven't done it yet, but I will probably turn ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist into an audiobook. Just know that because of the process of doing audiobooks, and mainly it's not even necessarily the time reading the book, it is the time editing the actual recordings. So and I'm not able to do that. So I'm using the two that I've done. Amazon recently, it was basically actually through their Kindle Direct program, they allowed you to create an audiobook using an AI voice. And I chose one that sounded, I mean, most of their voices sound pretty human. With the exception, the exception I take is then when they're reading web addresses, that's when it gets really weird because they actually spell it out or something like that. But they sound pretty good otherwise. And I'll probably do that with the ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists. And I may see if I can actually work that with a couple of the other ones that I have the rights to. But the ones that are through publishers, I do have no way of doing that because the publishers have the publication rights. They also have the audiobook rights, and they would have to do them, unfortunately. So it's just too much. Much as I like to read them myself, can't really do that. But I may put out an audio some point of some ghost stories as well at some point. Okay, let's see. Mysteries. So Lapaka, in the state of Hawaii, we have only one qualified exorcist. Okay. I guess the question becomes, what are the qualifications? And Lapaka, is that a Catholic exorcist or someone going, working along the lines of the beliefs of the Hawaiian people? Because there are people who might call themselves exorcists in other cultures because they believe spirits will forcefully take someone over, but and then not be able to, person can't get rid of them. But we would certainly not necessarily call that person an exorcist. It might be a shaman who's doing a ritual to kind of separate in that way. All right, Kathy, if you had to pick a song for your movie soundtrack, what would it be? Oh gosh. Wow. Possibly Spirits in the Material World by the Police. That's the one that pops in my head, off the top of my head. But I'd have to look into the song catalog for some of my favorite groups and see what would work. There's a lot of older music, related to spirits, a lot, especially old blues and things like that. You can find albums. In fact, I have a CD here of music related to spirits and old blues music, spirits and seances and things like that. So there's some cool old music that is public domain now that I probably would use a little bit of that. But honestly, if it's a sci-fi film, I'd want to bring in somebody to do something new specifically related to the film, I think, as much as possible. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, it's a Martinist. Okay. Let's see. Graveyard Grog, you'll be upfront and honest. When you were younger, you thought The Exorcist was a horror film about someone who couldn't stop exercising. It's funny, nobody ever made that movie. At least not that I know of. There was, of course, the sequel to The Exorcist called Repossessed with Linda Blair and Leslie Nielsen, which, of course, is a comedy. And I think you might even be able to find it on either Tubi or one of the free streaming services, maybe even on YouTube. It's a bad movie, but it's worth watching because it got Linda Blair in it, playing the same character from The Exorcist. I actually went to see The Exorcist when I was in high school, and I had just read a lengthy article about it. I had read the book, and the book was good, but I had read a lengthy article about it in a magazine called Ciné Fantastique, which is a kind of science fiction horror magazine, all about the special effects. And I was with two or three of my friends, and they were cowering on the floor when I was pretty much laughing, especially when her head spun around, because I thought the effect was so awful. It was not a good effect at all. If any of you watch that movie today, you'll see some special effects that you'll think, they should have done via CGI if they had CGI back then. So terrible, terrible stuff. Let's see. Paul, your Catholic relatives from Italy believed in a lot of superstitions. People in different cultures have various belief systems, superstitions. There are different religious beliefs, all sorts of things, supernatural related belief systems. I teach a course in the spring usually about parapsychology and anthropology, kind of looking cross-culturally at some of that stuff. So kind of cool. Monty Python sang a rather funny song about us Roman Catholics and the meaning of life. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? I probably would have to look for a song by Monty Python to include in that sci-fi film somehow. I'm not sure exactly how I do that, but I know there's some stuff out there. Um, oh, so Graveyard Grug had a friend who wrote a couple articles. Yeah, that's a great magazine. I don't read it too often these days, but I still have some older issues. Mindful Magic, thanks for coming. Glad you're here. And let's see. And Rose, just to let you know, I've gotten referred to cases by Catholic priests where the families thought over the years, a couple poltergeist cases, sometimes what I've found, and I go back even to when I was working at the ASPR, and I joined a local magicians group, one of the chapters of the Society of American Magicians, because I'm also a mentalist magician, and had talks with a priest who had been a teacher at the Catholic school that a couple of the members of our club actually learned magic from. He was a magician himself. And we had talks about this sort of thing. And I've talked to other people, religious folks, and it's really interesting. The really educated ones, talk to some Jesuit priests. They'll really know what's going on. Can really talk about where the beliefs come from and what they have to go through in terms of dealing with this kind of phenomena as well. Let's see, who would play you in my movie? Well, I don't know that my character specifically would be in that movie. There'd be one based on me. I don't know exactly off the top of my head who would actually play me. I've thought about that in the past. It just, I haven't really thought about who might be a good Lloyd. It has to be somebody with some comedy background, or at least the ability to do a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. I'll have to say that. Because I can be a little irreverent when it comes right down to it. And Graveyard Grog, can never go wrong with Brighter Side of Life, absolutely. I think Fun as Hell, paranormal movie was Peter Jackson's The Frighteners. I love that movie. I love The Frighteners. I think it's a great movie. It'd be really good if they redid that movie or did a version of that kind of thing. Just the initial premise is really amusing and funny. I also like a movie called High Spirits, which is out there in the free streaming services. In fact, it's one of Liam Neeson's early appearances, playing a ghost. And it's just a fun movie with a lot of very recognizable people about a haunted castle. Just worth seeing. There's a bunch of other fun movies out there that are great. One of my favorite all-time movies, though, people ask me what's your favorite ghost movie. Yeah, Anthony Edwards. You must be psychic. Actually, back when we were pitching our original script for Rainy and Day Investigations, which became eventually the novel Near Death that we put out a few years ago, Anthony Edwards was in mind as playing one of the characters. Yeah, because that was before we changed the parapsychologist to a woman at that point. All right, so my favorite ghost movie is, oddly enough, an Abbott and Costello film, although I love Abbott and Costello films. This is not your typical Abbott and Costello movie. It's a movie called The Time of Their Lives. And I think it's been on free streaming services. It might be out there in other ways too. But Lou Costello plays a tinker from the Revolutionary War who, with the local lady of the manor, are mistaken as traitors to the Continental Army and cursed to remain on this property till something proves otherwise. He actually had a letter from George Washington proving he was on assignment, doing something for Washington, but it got misplaced. So skip to the 20th century, and the building's been restored. People come in, and Costello and the lady, I think it was Marjorie Lord, try to get the people to help them find the letter. Bud Abbott plays one of the characters. It's got some good comedy in it. It's a fun movie. It's a really great movie. It's one of my favorites. I actually watched it not too long ago. Again, I've seen it many, many times. If you want to watch a really interesting science fiction film that illustrates some elements of psychokinesis and other elements of psychic ability, there's a 1968 movie called The Power with George Hamilton, Michael Rennie, Suzanne Pleshette, and a bunch of other folks you'd recognize. It's a really cool movie. It's not a ghost movie, but it's a really cool sci-fi film. And then Topper. Actually, there was a previous, the 1937 movie Topper, which is based on the book. Topper Returns was not so much based on the second Topper novel, but the first movie was somewhat based on the book Topper by Thorne Smith, and stars Cary Grant as one of the ghosts. And that is available in the public domain. You can definitely find that on YouTube. It's even on the Internet Archive to download. So highly recommend that movie too. It's another fun movie that's out there. We could talk, I teach a course every once in a while on pop culture where we go over sorts of movies and all sorts of stuff. There are some great movies out there portraying psychic ability and mediumship and all sorts of stuff. That was Roland Young playing Topper in the 1930s movie. And of course, there was the Topper TV series in the 1950s, which you can find a few episodes out there on with Leo G. Carroll. And the two best ghosts, the ghosts that I first saw on TV that made me not afraid of ghosts, wasn't even Casper the Friendly Ghost. It was the Topper TV show, which was in reruns when I was a kid. And George and Marion Kirby and the dog, the ghost dog, the St. Bernard Neil, were the best ghosts I've ever seen, and kind of easily set the tone for me in what I believed about ghosts in some respects. All right, we're down to the wire here. Start the Revolution Without Me, Gene Wilder and Donald Sutherland. It's a fun movie too. There are a lot of movies that people have forgotten about, but worth seeing. All right. All of that said, I'm back in 2 weeks. Again, I want to just put in the link to the raffle of Laura Lynn Jackson's, one of her readings, plus other stuff in support of the Rhine Research Center. I am back on the 28th of this month. Just as a reminder, we do start our new courses for the Rhine Education Center on October 1st. There's many to choose from, one of which is a course on my cases. There's a lot of stuff to download, by the way. I supply a lot of materials as well. So please join me again. Tell your friends, subscribe to this channel. Feel free to watch some of the older episodes because there are different questions and discussions. Some of the stuff comes up again and again, but different discussions. Come with questions next time. You can even, if you look in the channel description, you'll see an email from me. Which is askprofparanormal@gmail.com. Send me questions in advance, topics to talk about. Happy to do that. And for those of you who are not aware, the Rhine Research Center does have, thank you, Angie, a great video library that is back online with over 100 lecture videos. And right now, many of them are free if you go to the Rhine website, just rhine.org. You'll find a couple of my lectures there as well. Thanks, everybody. And have a good couple of weeks. We'll see you on the 28th. Good night.